Good morning. Welcome back. Welcome to our last day of Stewardship Kaleidoscope. I hope you enjoyed your workshops this morning. To all of those of you who are virtual with us, I hope that you've been enjoying the conference. Good to see you all here. And I hope that everyone has enjoyed themselves. We're getting ready for our last plenary session. We'll start in just a minute, followed by closing worship. There will be really just a very short bio break between those two things, not a real break. So if you have to get up and move or run to the restroom, run. This afternoon, all participants, both in person and virtual, are going to get an email. In that email, there's going to be a bunch of links. One link will be to a conference survey. Please take the survey. It will take you about 10 minutes. This is how the planning team makes the conference better for you. So this is how you co-create with us. Please take it. We take it seriously. It's really valuable for us. I know no one likes surveys. Please take the survey. And if you put your contact information in the back, if you're virtual or in person, there is a chance for you to win a registration for the conference next year. And the conference next year, mark your calendars now, will be September 26th, I'll give you the right dates, September 26th through 28th in Savannah, Georgia. So we hope that you will all be there. Those of you who are virtual, maybe you can come in person, and we will be figuring out how we are doing this as we move through the year. One of the other items in the email that you're going to get this afternoon is a call for presenters. Part of how we build the kaleidoscope of information that we offer is by getting information from you, not just in the form of the survey, but in what you think we should be presenting, what information you think is valuable. So if you are a speaker, if you are passionate about stewardship in some capacity, if you know someone who is passionate about stewardship, complete the call for presenters. It'll take you 3 to 5 minutes. And then we have a committee that reviews all of those to build what our conference will look like from that. So we invite you to be a part of doing that. That will be one of the links. So we are formally concluding this afternoon following worship. The planning team will be still hovering around if you have any questions as you leave, but the conference is over at 12:30 when worship is over. We so appreciate you all being here and participating with us in all the ways you do. Don't stop asking questions. Don't stop engaging with us. We're here, and you can always reach us at info@stewardshipkaleidoscope.org. With that, I'd like to introduce Rick Young of TPF, the Texas Presbyterian Foundation, to offer a few words.
Thank you, Maggie. Well, let me begin by saying thank you to each one of you for being here and all of those that are joining us virtually. We understand you are in the trenches, and we appreciate what you do, and we understand how hard it is. So thank you for being here. Thanks to the fellow sponsors for making sure that this happens. And join me, if you will, put your hands together for the planning team. They have worked diligently. I'd tell us to stand and give a standing ovation, but that is so un-Presbyterian, you wouldn't do it anyway. So Texas Presbyterian Foundation, as Maggie said, is a nonprofit organization out of Texas, but we serve in 28 different states. We work together with congregations and other nonprofits for investments, as well as education and generosity information. We're thrilled you saw in your booklet about a new website that's available to everyone, tpflegacybuilder.org. We invite you to come look at that. And with that, Robert, I'm going to sit down and let you run the video. Maggie, thank you. We are Texas Presbyterian Foundation, a financial services firm focused on enabling and expanding mission. It's our sole purpose It's who we are. It's why we exist.
Every day, we help churches and other nonprofit organizations create gifts that last for generations, resulting in a long-term legacy.
But we're so much more than this. In addition to providing individual investment resources, we offer services supporting legacy gift programs for churches and other nonprofit institutions, equipping organizations with educational tools that foster generosity and strengthen stewardship initiatives. Our team can help establish a new legacy plan or revitalize an existing program.
Legacy funds support essential institutional necessities such as capital improvements, vital mission efforts, and organizational programming. The funds enable your institution to sustain its commitment to supporting important causes and allow generous individuals to make an enduring impact lasting beyond their lifetimes.
As a low-cost provider with expertise in church and nonprofit financial investment, we can guide your organization through the development of tools, policies, and procedures to optimize and promote your legacy program. We can also work directly with individuals to tailor a variety of legacy giving options that satisfy their long-term goals.
We stand ready to assist your organization in building a lasting legacy. By partnering with us, your mission gains an expert team that shares your vision and can increase your effectiveness. Texas Presbyterian Foundation, enabling an expanding mission together.
Robert's finding the PowerPoint up there. Good morning. My name is Keith Mundy, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today on behalf of Vanco Faith. Some of you might be familiar with a company called Vanco, who has been working with congregations for more than 20 years. This would include today over 1,500 Presbyterian congregations and almost 4,000 ELCA congregations. We are here because Vanco offers real tools for real ministry. We are serving congregations in a variety of different ways. We are partners with both the ELCA and with the Presbyterians, and we are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the work that we do and in the growth of our organization. And Vanco has been growing to serve congregations. In the last 8 months, Vanco has added more than 100 employees to our growing company. And these people are looking for ways to develop new tools to serve congregations, schools, and small business. We do a lot of work in the area of processing. That's what many people think that our work is about. That is, and historically has been a primary focus. But increasingly, we're moving towards engaging members and friends and visitors in worship and ministry. How do we enhance the engagement experience? How do we become involved in communication and education? And how do we help leaders make more informed decisions about present and future ministry? One of the ways that we do that is by offering a variety of ways that we can connect with people, whether it's by text, kiosk, online, mobile, or through swipe. There are ways that people can give, but also ways that people can engage and communicate. One of the newest ways that we have is something called Vanco Online, which uses storytelling as a way to talk with people about giving opportunities. This is an example of a page from a fictitious church called Stewardship Kaleidoscope Church. It gives examples of some of the, we will be worshiping for our only time or second time this afternoon, okay? But this focuses on ways that we can talk about different ministries, and it's a storytelling way. This is kind of the opening screen, and then there's a second screen And if you look at that, this goes into greater detail, or this is the format that it would be used in a mobile application. And the next screen shows how it would give more detail. This is the second screen or tile on a particular giving opportunity. And this is a place where you can include links, such as video links or documents to tell more stories about that specific ministry and begin to make your gift. These provide a way that you can then summarize the gifts that you have made. And we have found this format has helped congregations increase their giving by 10% simply by shifting to this storytelling format. There are some of the usual methods of payment, whether that's by credit card or by bank transfer. And we also offer something called Vanco Mobile. Some of you might have seen the flyer at the back and the right-hand back of your folder that talks about this, but this gives you the capability to work with this on a mobile basis. It provides a way to keep a list of who the members are in your congregation. It gives you a way to do some scheduling and planning. It gives you a way to communicate with people. These are examples of tools that we see are complements to the giving process. And lastly, I would say we offer a variety of resources to help you get started and to keep you informed about what's happening in the marketplace. Vanco each year does some research and makes that research available to show you what some of those recent trends are. Thank you for those who had a chance to visit our table this week. And we are available to you to provide information about our services. Hope to talk with you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick and Keith, and thank you again to all of our sponsors who do so much to make this conference possible. I forgot one important thing. I told you there were going to be 3 links in the email, and I only told you about 2 of them. You're going to get the email, but the third link is actually really important as well. And that is going to take you to the conference resource page. On the conference resource page, you will have access to the recordings of all of the events that were live streamed in this room, as well as the PowerPoint and supporting material and presentations from all of the presentations. So there will be a link to the conference resource page. There will be an access code for how to get into that page. It is password protected. So look for that in that email that you're going to get this afternoon as well. And with that, I would like to welcome back the Reverend Dr. Todd Bolsinger to share more with us. Please give him a round of applause as he comes up.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you all. Over the pandemic, I had a friend of mine, a young friend in my life, who used the pandemic to learn Mandarin and write a novel. I gained 8 pounds and binge watched Ted Lasso. I don't know, any Ted Lasso fans? One of the things that happened that was really amazing is that because I fell in love with that little show, I said something on Facebook about it, and somebody connected me to the executive producer, not Jason Sudeikis, but Bill Lawrence, who was kind enough to let me interview him. And so one of the things I did is I did an interview with Bill Lawrence about Lasso leadership lessons, and I was able to put that together on the work that I do at the Dupree Center for Church Leadership. And if you would like to get that or any of our resources, here's my little commercial. You can do this by texting the word change to 66866. I wish I was clever enough to have come up with that. I've got staff people who are better than me. And I got to tell you, as a pastor, I never would have had that many 6s in a number that together. That was a little scary for a second. But if you're interested in getting any of our resources or connecting to us, if you just text the word change to 66866 or find us at the dupree.org/church, you can find things like our Ted Lasso lessons on leadership and a lot of the other things that we do as well. We just want to make those available to you. And wherever I go, because Fuller is so gracious at letting me travel, I like to just say a good word for them as well in terms of the Dupree Center that I serve at. Okay, enough for that. Yes, when we were together, we talked about stewardship and leadership. We've talked a lot about the way that stewardship requires leadership. the kinds of changes of culture that we need to make in our organizations. Remember, and one of the most sobering parts of this whole thing has been the conversation about sabotage. I have to tell you that in every one-on-one conversation that I have had since I've been here with people, that's the conversation they want to have as well. And it makes sense to me, because remember what Ed Friedman said is that the capacity of a leader to be prepared for, to be aware of, and to learn how to skillfully deal with sabotage may be the most important aspect of leadership. It's literally the key to the kingdom. When I started looking into this whole notion of sabotage and how leaders can respond to it wisely and well, I began to go into, I did kind of a study on two different sides of literature. One was spiritual formation literature about the way in which leaders are able to persevere, the hupomone, a sense of perseverance that we need to have as Christian leaders. And the other was around this whole notion of resilience. And there's lots of definitions of resilience out there and lots of good resources. My favorite definition comes from a guy named Andrew Zolli, who worked with nations that had to be resilient, like nations that had to come back from catastrophes or genocide, like Rwanda. And his definition of resilience is this: the resilience is the capacity to maintain core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. Maintain core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. If you spend more than 6 minutes with me, you know that the verb maintain doesn't get me out of bed in the morning. I'm not exactly a maintain kind of guy, but maintaining core purpose and integrity, well, I'll give my life for. That's where we have a sense of, that sense of purpose and integrity is critical to us. Even these conversations about stewardship at one level or another are really about the way in which we, in an enduring way, help our congregations maintain core purpose and integrity. So what do we do when that's threatened? How do we develop the capacity to be resilient, to maintain core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances, and particularly dramatically changed circumstances that cause so much anxiety that it causes our own people to resist us? Let me take you to one of my favorite days in history, August 28th, 1963. 250,000 people gathered in their Sunday best in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Many of them came on church buses, and a number of them came from the South. They came for a march for freedom and jobs. That's what it was called. And they listened to speakers all day long talk about the need for for the civil rights to take place in a deeper way within our culture. 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the speakers proclaimed, our people are still not free. And so as 250,000 people, many of them coming from the front lines of the civil rights movement, coming from the lunch counters and the protests and the marches and the hoses and the dogs and the jails, gathered there in front of the Lincoln Memorial, they heard Mahalia Jackson sing songs that Roger Mudd said was enough to fill the entire day, that they could have gone home after that. But then was introduced as the moral leader of our country, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He stood up to give a speech that he and his speechwriter worked on until 4 a.m. They worked together on 4 a.m. And he gave a speech that we now know as the I Have a Dream speech. Most of you who've studied this know that the I Have a Dream section actually wasn't in the original speech. He and his speechwriter, Clarence B. Jones, had worked till 4 a.m. to come up with a speech that they wanted to use that used a completely different metaphor. They wanted it to be sober, to be taken seriously, to never be accused of rabble rousing or inciting the public. And instead, they came up with a metaphor that basically said this: the United States of America has given a bad check to its African-American citizens. That in the Emancipation Proclamation, there is a promissory note that 100 years later has been returned insufficient funds. And it's now time for the government to make good on the promises of the Emancipation Proclamation and indeed the Declaration of Independence. And Dr. King laid that out in front of these 250,000 people. And he hit a moment in the speech when I think he knew he was supposed to get a response, and it didn't happen. You've had that moment, right? You've had that experience where, like, you're thinking, I'm supposed to get a laugh or a joke, or I'm supposed to get an applause, or I'm supposed to, what happened at this moment? And he paused for just a second. And when he paused in that second, he heard behind him Mahalia Jackson say, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." Mahalia Jackson had been with him in Detroit and some other places and had heard him do this. And so he paused at that moment. He slid his notes across the lectern. And Clarence B. Jones looked to the person next to him and said, "These people don't know, but they're about to go to church." And 250,000 people who had come from the lunch counters and the marches and the protests and the hoses and the dogs and the jails listened as he launched into Isaiah 40. "I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together." This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. This is the faith that I go back to the South with, because I believe that a day is coming when God is going to redeem creation down to the dirt. We get back to work. We go back to the protests and the marches and the lunch counters and the hoses and the dogs and the jails. This is the faith that I go back to the South with, because I believe that God is doing something that will happen, and that a day will come when the glory of the Lord shall be revealed and all flesh shall see it. And in that moment, in seeing it, all justice will roll down, because I believe it. We go back to work. With this faith, I go back to the South. With this faith, we'll be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we'll be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Oh man, those of us who preach, this is a masterclass, right? This is parallelism. This is what we were taught in seminary. This is where you take two ideas, and by linking them together, you get one concept that is richer and fuller and more deeply. This is beautiful. He links together hew and transform. With this faith, we'll be able to hew out of a mountain of despair stones of hope. We'll be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Hew. What do you do when you're facing a mountain of despair? What do you do when you're facing resistance at every turn? What do you do when you're facing a 400-year-old mountain of despair like our African-American brothers and sisters have been facing even today? Dr. King says, you don't blow it up with dynamite, you don't bash it with a sledgehammer, and you don't back down. You hew it. You transform it. I don't know about you, but I can't read this without hearing 1 Peter echoing in my ears. "Come to him, a living stone, and let yourself as living stones be built into a dwelling place for God," a place where the presence of God is seen, where the glory of God is revealed. Can you possibly believe that this place of deep resistance, this granite mountain of despair, can actually become the building blocks for the glory of the Lord to be revealed, for the presence of God to be seen? Can we possibly believe that that could be transformed in such a way? You hew it. So how do we become a tool that can hew? A tool that can hew is a tempered tool. It's not a sledgehammer that's just strong. It's a chisel that is both stronger than the raw material and also tempered, more flexible. It has the capacity to cut through and to form and transform. And the kind of resilience we need comes out of that experience of becoming a tool that can hew. In our research, what I've found is that becoming a resilient tool is a process. We can ask ourselves this question: how am I supposed to be a leader who can find the resilience to face resistance? How do we find the resilience to overcome a failure of nerve and a failure of heart, like we talked about last time? And what I want you to know, it's not found, it's formed. It's formed as a process, and it's formed in the crucible of leadership. So here's what I want to introduce you to this morning: that a tempered, resilient leader as one with a grounded identity and a resilient character that is shaped through reflection, relationships, and a rule of life in a rhythm of leading and not leading. reflection, relationships, and a rule of life in a rhythm of leading and not leading. Let me take you through that process, because it is indeed a process. It's a process of how steel becomes a tempered tool that would be common in a blacksmith shop. There is in Los Angeles, California, an urban blacksmithing community. They are in a neighborhood that has not had a horse there in 100 years, but there are blacksmiths. And you can sign up to take a blacksmithing class. And my wife and I did. My wife, who's the polymath of the family, she's an executive coach and a counselor and an artist who does art with not just painting, she does encaustic painting also, which is where you paint with a blowtorch and wax. And so when I told her that I was going to take a blacksmithing class, she was stunned because the only thing I ever create is just like with my words, with a keyboard. I got no skills whatsoever for anything creative, but I wanted to take this one. So we signed up together for this class. We enter into this shop and you go walking into the shop, and here we do, I'm wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and I go walking in, and every single thing in that shop can kill you. And the first thing they do is hand you a clipboard, and they make you sign your name on a line that says you understand that everything in this shop can kill you. And you are in the middle of the danger, and you can feel the fire coming out of the forges, and they put you in front of an anvil. And this was my anvil. I got to put my name on the anvil. It was my own place. And they put me there, and they give me ear protection. That's it, earplugs. I think I should get chain mail, like a helmet or something, like ear protection. That's it. I'm wearing a cotton t-shirt, jeans, and earplugs. And they hand me a pair of tongs and a piece of steel. And they said, here, take the steel and put it into the fire. And without so much as a safety lecture, I'm blacksmithing. And I realized at this moment, sitting there in the middle of it, this is the experience of what it's like to be a leader. You walk into a place where every single thing in here could be possibly dangerous. You will feel completely ill-prepared for this moment. You don't have nearly enough protection as you thought you had, and you're in the middle of it before you know what you're doing. And that's the point. The first thing we learn about leaders developing resilience is that leaders are formed in leading. This is important thing for us to recognize. We don't learn to be leaders by reading books, going to workshops, going to classes. Says the guy who wrote a book, speaks at workshops, teaches classes. We learn to be leaders in leading. We are thrown into the leadership process headlong. And here's the thing about it. Every one of us who becomes a leader right after we were successful at something else, right? You become a leader right after you were good at something that was not leading. So you become a leader because you were good at something else. You were good at speaking. We talked about preaching. You become a pastor, right? You're a good scholar. You become the dean. You're a good salesperson. They make you the sales manager. In other words, when you become a leader, at that moment, you go from being an expert, like a technical expert with technical competence, to a person who is now a beginner all over again. And even when you step into a new context, a new challenge, when you find yourself in uncharted territory, every single challenge before you is one where you are having to learn in the middle of leading. And that's why it makes it so profoundly difficult. And that's why in the middle of leading, you need to go through a process of formation. We are formed in the crucible of leadership. And it is a process, just like blacksmithing. Like the way in which we took the steel and we put it into the fire, and through a process of heating and holding and hammering and quenching over and over and over again, this steel becomes a tempered tool that can hew hope out of despair. Heating through leading and reflection, holding through personal and professional relationships, hammering through spiritual practices and the practice of leadership, and quenching through rest and the slow release of leadership responsibilities. Let me take you through each of those just briefly to introduce you to the concepts. The first part is reflection. A grounded identity and resilient character that is shaped through reflection. So we're sitting in the middle of the blacksmithing class, and we've got the steel in the fire, and we're standing there. And then they do actually start the safety lecture, thanks be to God. And they're giving us some information, and they're giving us some instructions, and we're listening and taking notes. Finally, the guy stops and he says, "Here, let's do something. Just let's start for just a second. Reach back in with the tongs, pull out the steel, and look at it. Notice that it hasn't changed. That it looks exactly the same. It's the same color. It's the same composition. It's exactly the same. It's 700 degrees. It will burn the skin off your hands. Don't touch it. But it's not yet ready to be shaped. If you hit it now, you will just scar it and mar it. You cannot shape it. You cannot form it. It is not ready to be transformed. It has to go back in the fire." My father is a guy who was a coach and a teacher, and he loved to talk about leadership. And he used to always quote Harry Truman. And he would say, if you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen. And what we know what that means. It means that, look, if you're not ready for the heat of leadership, then maybe you shouldn't take it on. Here's what I want you to know. The heat of the kitchen ain't nearly hot enough. You got to go from the heat even further into the fire. And the fire for us is the fire of reflection. Vulnerable reflection. Vulnerable self-reflection. You got to put the steel back in the fire till it gets to 2,000 degrees, till it no longer is solid and gray, but it is now red and molten and almost oozy. You've got to allow yourself to experience the sense where it almost feels as if you are breaking down under it. We actually see this in Dr. King's life. There's a moment in the middle of the Montgomery bus boycott when he is a young leader who's been thrust into the national spotlight, and this has become bigger than they ever imagined, where in one night he actually says, he goes before the Lord and says to the Lord, if there's any way I could get out of this without people calling me a coward, I'd quit today. But if this is what you want me to do, I need you to meet me here. And he talked about how God met him there. And that moment of being vulnerable before the Lord gave him the strength that he needed, not only for the boycott, but for the next decade. And even, as he would say later, to face the day when he realized that he was going to look over the mountainside to the promised land and he wouldn't get there with them. This experience of vulnerable self-reflection is critical for a leader. I'm going to say this, friends, I rarely try to make kind of like, ironclad like definitions, but I have never seen a leader be able to be resilient in the midst of change without a capacity for deep, vulnerable self-reflection. If you don't have the capacity to come before the Lord or others and say, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Are you sure, O God, it's me? I don't know if I'm up for this. Can you meet me here?" If you don't have the ability to literally show up oozy, you feel like your entire personality might be falling apart. If you don't experience the vulnerability of self-reflection, you'll never be able to truly be transformed. Educator John Dewey supposedly said, "You don't learn by experiences, you learn by reflecting on experiences." And what we mean by reflection is deep, vulnerable self-reflection. The kind of self-reflection that Brene Brown has famously said is like embracing the suck. How painfully hard this is. And that when we see people who are vulnerable, when we admire them for their vulnerability, but when we experience it ourselves, we tend to diminish ourselves and look down at ourselves and speak badly of ourselves. But here's the great irony. Strength is formed in self-reflection. Resilience begins in vulnerable self-reflection. So the first habit, the first practice of a resilient leader is actually to embrace how unresilient you feel. It's how overwhelmed it is at this moment, and how oozy it feels to be in this moment, how much it feels as like your whole composition might actually be coming apart because you don't have an answer, because you feel vulnerable standing in front of people, because you realize and recognize how difficult this moment is. And even if you're in a system that's not safe enough for you to say that publicly, and I do understand that not every system is safe enough for you to say it publicly, especially for younger leaders. leaders of color, women leaders. We have not created cultures safe enough for vulnerability in most of our places. Which is why it's really important, if you're going to be vulnerable before God, that you understand that the fire is not enough. You also need an anvil. You got to be able to go from fire to anvil. We were sitting in the blacksmithing class, and the instructor said, okay, we put it back in the fire, and he talked some more, and he goes, okay, it's probably ready now. Now reach in. And we reached in and we pulled out the steel, and now it is red and it is burning and almost looks liquidy, and it's like it's just this weird moment, and you hold it up and it just starts to begin to bend. And he goes, look, it's really dangerous. So put it on the anvil. Don't walk it around the shop. Don't try to twist it into shape. Certainly don't hit it with a hammer. It'll explode in front of you. This is not what you're doing. What you need to recognize is at this moment, the only safe place for something this hot is on an anvil. Put it on the anvil. The anvil, the center of your workspace, the place where you live and exist is your relationships. We need, if we're going to lead resiliently, if we're going to lead in the face of resistance, we need more relationships, not less. We need trustworthy relationships. We need heavy, thick relationships. We need relationships that can hold all of the vulnerability of this moment and the uncertainty of this moment. And we need the kind of relationships that are like a heavy anvil. The vulnerability of leadership requires the security of relationships. And let's face it, for most of us, especially as we move further and further into leadership, it feels like we have fewer and fewer relationships. And this is exactly the reason why it's so dangerous for us. So I often think about this. Ronald Heifetz himself said that nobody would live in Boston without a winter coat, but that many of us try to lead without partners. I want to take it even further. I think we need 3 types of relationships. We need partners, we need mentors, and we need friends. If you're going to be leading in the face of resistance, if you're going to be leading in a way that cultivates resilience, you need partners, you need mentors, and you need friends. Here's how I think about that in my own life. My partners are the people who care about me even more than they care about, my partners are the people who care about the mission even more than they care about me. My partners are the people who care about the mission even more than they care about me. My partners are like the actors on the stage. If I'm not saying my line, they're looking at me going, say your line, right? They're the ones saying the show must go on. They're the ones reminding you that we got into this because of the mission. We have a cause, we have a purpose, we have something bigger than ourselves. Our partners care about the mission more than they care about me. So it's critical to us to ask ourselves, are we the only person who's trying to bring this change? Are we the only person who feels the anxiety of this moment? And can we believe that we can raise up partners? In the Hebrew scriptures, there's that incredible phrase that's used in Genesis, right? It is not good for Adam to be alone. That phrase, not good, is only used twice in the scriptures. It's used twice in the Hebrew scriptures. One, it's not good for Adam to be alone. And the other time is when Jethro looks at Moses and says, it's not good for you to lead alone. We need partners, which is why I believe that there's no such thing as a solo pastor. And it's why I believe so deeply in the polity that I committed to as a part of the Presbyterian Church, where the most central reality about what it means to lead is the phrase together with the pastor, together with the session. We need partners. Partners are people who care about the mission even more than they care about you or me. My partners care about the mission more than they care about me. My friends are the people who care about me even more than they care about the mission. My friends are the people who love me and know me and care about me, who kind of smirk when they see me up front preaching or they hear that I'm traveling. My friends are the people who want to know when I'm going to be back so we can have dinner, and they ask me about my wife and my kids and my big dog. My friends are the people who, they'll say to me, Todd, I heard that you got a new book out. And I said, I do. I'm really excited about that. And I said, would you like to read it? And they go, no, not at all. I'm not even interested in that thing you're talking about. What is it you write about again? Right? And we all need people in our lives who care about us more than they care about what we're trying to accomplish. It's critical to us. And let's be really clear about this. Don't confuse the difference between partners and friends. Don't try to pack the session with your friends. That's toxic. Well, I learned this actually when I asked a friend to come on my session. I said, look, you're a good friend. You trust me. You love my family. You love stuff. I'd love to have you on session. And he looked at me and said, Todd, I love the church. I love going to the church. You're a really good pastor. I really appreciate it here. But you got to know that anytime we made a vote, I'd be on your side and not on the session side. And I got a feeling that would go badly. And I'm not sure if God's in that. A good reminder, right? We need lots of relationships, but we need to be clear that we don't confuse the difference between partners and friends. Your mentors are the people who care about you for the sake of your mission. My mentors are the people who care about me for the sake of my mission. My mentors are those people. And what I mean by mentors is they can be informal mentors, but they're also spiritual directors, therapists, coaches. They're people who I want to have in my life all the time so that I can function at the very best part of my life, so that I can accomplish the thing that God's asked me to accomplish and to do. Those are the people in my life. It's the reason why in the work that my wife and I do in executive coaching, we talk about helping faith leaders thrive as change leaders. We want you to thrive, but we also want you to accomplish the change that God's called you to accomplish. Let me just say this. I have this little weird fantasy. I can admit it to you Presbyterians, and it feels embarrassing to do so with the Lutherans in the room. But every now and then I have this weird little fantasy that I'm a bishop. I don't even actually believe in bishops. Sorry, Lutherans. But every now and then I think, if I was a bishop, and that what's crack up is I spend a lot of time now with Methodists and Lutherans and Episcopalians, and I know some bishops, and they always look at me like, you got a weird fantasy life. But I often think, if I was a bishop, I'd want to make sure this is clear. If I'm your bishop and I'm spiritually responsible for you, I'd like you to know this. If you lead anything, without a spiritual director or a therapist or a coach, I'm going to consider that leadership malpractice. You cannot lead alone. Now, I want you to know this. I didn't make that up. I got that from my wife, who is a marriage and family therapist in Los Angeles, who was working in our presbytery on our clergy sexual misconduct task force. She was often the person who had to go meet with those people, usually women, who were abused because pastors, usually men, were so confused about their boundaries and their power dynamics that they ended up harming these women deeply. And I remember her coming home one day after a particularly painful meeting and saying, Todd, I just don't get you guys. She said, I'm a therapist in the state of California. I got 15 clients. If I don't have supervision and I make a mistake, the state of California will hold me more liable. You have 1,500 members and nobody ever talks to you about anything. You need to have places where people talk to you about your soul and about your heart and your relationships and about your leadership. They don't have to be formal, but they should be serious enough that you invest in them. It's why one of the central spiritual practices that I insist from everybody who is one of my students is that you have a season of time where you give yourselves to putting yourselves vulnerably on an anvil of relationships with partners and friends, but also mentors who can hold your vulnerability. That's why as I work as an executive coach, I say to people all the time, the most important thing for you is that you show up oozy, show up vulnerably, show up ready for the formation, bring me the truth. Don't try to impress me. The worst thing is for you to show up as a 700-degree leader. Don't worry, it's hot in there, but I'm doing fine. Nothing's affecting me, just great. Matter of fact, I got a couple of ideas I want to run by you. Let's try this. You're wasting my time. and you're probably harming your congregation. Because the pounding that'll come at this moment will just mar you and scar you, and eventually it'll break you. And if there's anything we've learned in the last several years, is that faking it till you make it will break you. You need places where you show up vulnerable, show up oozy. Oftentimes when I talk about this, people will say to me, so Todd, where do I get a mentor? How do I get a coach? How do I get, I said, there's lots of ways we can refer you to people. There's probably spiritual directors and therapists, and almost every denomination now, thanks be to God, that I work with has networks of coaches and therapists and spiritual directors. It's amazing and it's wonderful. But here's the most important thing. A friend of mine did a study with funded by the Murdoch Trust in Pacific Northwest, where they were trying to discover why mentoring programs with kids tend to do really well, but mentoring programs with adults tend not. Like there's lots of, most of us were shaped. We're probably in this room because we had some mentor as a youth, right? And why do places like Youth for Christ that I came out of, or Young Life, or Big Brother, Big Sister, or My Brother's Keepers, or Boys and Girls Clubs, why do they seem to do so well with youth? But when you try to put adult mentoring programs in place, they tend not to work well. Even major companies that put mentoring in the middle of their corporation, the results are less than satisfying. And they discovered this little fact, this little kind of developmental reality. In a youth mentoring relationship, the mentor holds the energy for the relationship. The mentor does, right? And you did this when you were in youth ministry. You knew that your job was to initiate, to reach out, to connect with them, to check with them. My daughter was a youth pastor who worked for Young Life and then a church for several years. And she was always texting or connecting to or tweeting. During the pandemic, she was showing up with Chick-fil-A, putting it on the driveway, waving to the kids wanting them to know that even though I can't see you face to face, I'm care for you, I love you, here's lunch, try something, right? She was doing everything she could to connect. You take the initiative. It's why we showed up at football games and basketball games. It's why I always went to cross country meets, because like nobody's cheering those kids on. They might run by for only 10 seconds, but they'll remember that Pastor Todd was there, right? For mentoring youth, the mentor holds the relationship. For adults to get transformed, the mentee has to hold the relationship. Adults have to be willing to own, be oozy, be vulnerable, to take the initiative, to take responsibility for their own learning. So I always tell my students, more important than finding a mentor is that you become a person who is always a mentee. That you can remember yourself, that you are always having to be learning, that you have to be in the process of being vulnerable and honest in self-reflection and with safety of relationships, moving yourself through. So I teach my doctoral students who say, I'm not sure how I can get a mentor. I said, here, let me teach you this. You can have this for free. One question. If you get this question down, you can get a mentor for the rest of your life. And the question goes like this. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? That's it. Say to the person who you look at, who you respect, who you know is safe, and say, can I get you a cup of coffee? I'd like to spend a few minutes with you. And if it's okay, I'd like to lay some stuff on you that's really important to me. And when you show up oozy. Don't try to protect them. Don't be a 700-degree leader trying to demonstrate how effective you are, what a great leader you are. Show up vulnerably, and you will find that people are willing to hold you. And what you'll find is you'll be filled with people who you call mentors, and they might not even know, but they know they're important in your life and you're important in theirs. And you know that you are filled with the support you need. Heating, vulnerable self-reflection, holding the anvil of relationships, hammering. When I was in the class, we take the steel out of the fire. It's all oozy and stuff. We put it on the anvil, and I grabbed the big old hammer. And I got to tell you, I approached that blacksmithing like the captain of the wrestling team that I once was, just pounding away on that sucker. I was like, we're going to make something really good, and I'm going to beat everybody else. I'm an Enneagram 8. So that, It means that I don't have to kick down every door, just the ones that are closed. And I just tend to aggressively attack anything new I'm learning. And I'm just going at it. And finally he walks up and he goes, brother, ho, 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 ho. Let the hammer do the work. Just pick it up and let it fall. And pick it up and let it fall. And do it over and over and over again. And when the steel becomes too cool, put it back in the fire. And when it's ready to be hit again, put it back on the anvil and hit it again. Let the hammer do the work. The hammer for the leader are our practices. They're the practices of leadership, and they're really our spiritual practices. They're the things that we allow the Lord to use to shape us and strengthen us and turn us into the tools that God needs for this moment. We're the tool in the hands of God, and the way we get shaped is through those practices. So a tempered resilience is a grounded identity and resilient character that is shaped through reflection, relationships, and a rule of life. The set of spiritual practices that you take on that fill out your life, that by being intentional about them, shape you, and particularly shape you for this moment. Everybody has a rule of life. We all have certain things that are spiritual practices, and certain things are practices that are more spiritual than we would ever let on, right? We all have some set of practices. We may not have written it down. We might not have thought about it that way. We might not have kind of categorized it that way, but there are a set of spiritual practices. If you look closely at the literature of the civil rights movement, Dr. King had a set of spiritual practices that everybody had to commit to. If you wanted to be part of his movement of nonviolent direct action, there were things you had to do every day because you needed to be shaped into a person who could take the abuse, the anger. And so there was a set of practices you committed to be part of it because we need a set of spiritual practices that are shaped for the challenge in front of us. We know this to be true, right? There's a great Dallas Willard points out that the weird part about spiritual disciplines is that you do them with your physical body, right? Because what we do with our body influences and changes our souls. What we do with our hands and our mind and our voice, what we do with our time and our energy changes us and shapes us. What you do with your body hammers into you lasting changes. So just think about this for a second. I'll just give you a moment. Just think along with me, right? As concretely as you can. Just think back. What were the very first spiritual practices that you remember committing to in your life? Do you remember when they might not have been called that, but just when someone said to you, okay, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, then here's what you do. And maybe it was your mother, your grandmother, your parents in your household. Maybe it was like me, where I had a set of spiritual practices growing up in a church-going home, but I didn't think about it. I grew up Roman Catholic. I love my Catholic background, by the way. I always think being a Catholic is like, it's like I grew up in my mother's house and I can't live there anymore, but I don't need you to make fun of the wallpaper because it's really the place that shaped me. And I love that part of my background and my tradition. And I grew up going to mass almost every week. It was a set of spiritual practices that was really important to us. It was really important to our family. It shaped me. I went to church every week. But I hadn't read a Bible. So when I was 15 years old, I have an encounter with somebody who told me that Jesus wanted to know me and have a relationship with me. And I needed to get to know Jesus. And so I wanted a Bible. And so my mother got me a Bible. She found a Catholic version of the old Living Bible, The Way. Remember that like old Living Bible? And she found my friends all had the green Protestant one. I had the blue Catholic one. And I read the Bible because somebody said to me, if you want to be a follower of Jesus, you should read the Bible every day and you should pray every day. And so I read the Bible every day. I prayed every day. I went to church every week. Those were my first spiritual practices. And I remember how they shaped me. But I also know that there came a time when that wasn't enough, right? When I started doing ministry and I needed to know more of the scriptures than I could read every day. When I started becoming a preacher, when I needed to spend a lot of time in deep scripture study. I went to seminary. I learned how to not only just read the Bible, but read the Bible critically. By the time I was preaching, and you all know this, you can't get enough with reading a chapter of the Bible every day. You do hours of deep study. My central spiritual practice of my life for 27 years was the deep study of Scripture. And my prayer life had to change too. It wasn't enough to have the old prayer checklist that I had. I had to learn how to pray with intercession and pray lamentation and prayer confession and hold my congregation in prayer and lead them in prayer. The spiritual practices changed. When I started as a new Christian, I realized, I look back now, and I was practically monastic. I was a teenager, so I was committed to celibacy, whether I wanted to be or not. I was a youth leader, so I was committed to poverty. I was even committed to stability. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that when my friends were backpacking through Europe, I was taking kids to camp. I stayed home. Today, I'm a 57-year-old married man who makes more money than my mother-in-law ever thought I would, who before COVID was traveling 100,000 miles a year, and looks like I might be going back that way. So what are the spiritual practices I need today? After 27 years of being a pastor and preaching every week, I preach about 4 or 5 times a year. I got 4 sermons. They're all pretty good. I do them over and over again. But what's the use of the Scriptures in my life? Where's the spiritual practice that I need today? And what do I need today to lead change or to coach others leading change? How have they changed over the years? I remember this experience particularly, and things that I didn't think were spiritual practices at the time, but I look back now and realize they were part of the rule of life. I remember about 3 years into being a head of staff, I became a senior pastor and head of staff when I was 33. We had little kids. My daughter was 3 months old when I became a senior pastor. My son was 3.5 years old. I had a toddler and a little kid. I held up my daughter the day they voted me in. I said, "You're all invited to her high school graduation." And by the glory of God and the goodness and grace of God, he gave us the desires of our heart, and we were there until she graduated. It was amazing. And I think back about the kind of ways that I needed as I was growing as a pastor and I was growing as a father, and we were growing in this ministry, that our practices had to change. And I remember 3 years in to being a pastor, and my wife came to me one day and said, "Look, I know you really want to do a good job, and I know you think sometimes because you're younger, you got to work extra hard, but here's the deal. Your kids are getting older and you're out every night. Todd, you're not going to be able to be the father you want, and we're not going to have the marriage you want if you're out every night. I need you to go back and talk to Session about how many nights you really got to be out." I got to admit, I was nervous. I was afraid they would look at that as a weakness. I'd worked really hard, and I was working hard, and I was proud of the fact that I was such a hard worker. And I remember going to my session and saying, "Look, my wife has said this, and we got to talk, and I got to talk to you about how many nights a week I need to be out." And I swear, I love those folks. They looked at me and said, "We want you to thrive. You need to make sure that you're home. You need to be a dad." There was an elder in the middle of this named Al Sloan. He came from Iowa. Al looked at me and said, "We want you to have a great ministry and a great life. So what do you need to change?" So we made a deal that I'd only be out a couple of nights a week, and we started talking. And one of the things we decided was that my wife and I would try to have a date night once a week. And we didn't have enough money to go out every week in that way. So Al and his wife, Enid, showed up every Tuesday night at our house and babysat our kids. They became surrogate grandparents to our kids so we could have a date night. And really, most of the time, we couldn't afford to do it. We'd just go get like frozen yogurt and sit on a bench and just make sure that we didn't come back until after they put Allie to bed. Because we always fought about putting her to bed, and I didn't want to fight with my wife on date night. And so we would just say, "Okay, now she's probably at bed, we'll go home." And we did it week after week after week. It became part of our rule of life. We started doing a Sunday dinner every week where we gathered our kids together and we reflected on the week, and we taught them the prayer of examine, consolations and desolations. We didn't call it that. We called it holy high-low. But we wanted our family to be a place where we could reflect honestly about our lives and even some of the tolls that it took being a pastor's family. This was part of our rule of life. We needed it to be able to thrive as leaders. What I want to say to you is, if you're now stepping into a moment where you are trying to lead your church forward into change, into the middle of uncharted territory, into this wildly disruptive world where there's high anxiety and you're getting resistance, you probably need some different spiritual practices. Those practices are like the hammers that shape you, and you need to be shaped for the tool, that shaped for the mission that has been put in front of you. I won't go into depth. I talk about it in the book, but some of the hammers that I've learned are some different kinds of spiritual practices. Like I need intentional spiritual practices that keep me learning. I found that the further I go up the food chain in organizations, the smarter that I think I am, the more initials that I have, the more titles that I have, the more heavy furniture that I get to sit in, I start thinking I'm really an expert. And what I really need is some places where I'm teachable and open and learning. I needed to be doing things all the time that remind me of what it's like to be a beginner, what it feels to be vulnerable, what it means to say, I don't know, what it's like to confront the fact that I don't like the fact that I don't have to say, I don't know. So I need some intentional practices in my life for learning. I remember this experience of traveling in Europe, and I was working on a PhD, and we went into a place in Switzerland where we were just going in to go get fondue. And I listened to my waiter talk 3 different languages at 3 different tables fluently. And I thought to myself, I'm a doctoral student and I can barely get through 1. Oh, I can read a couple of dead languages, like that's going to do me any good. Oh my gosh. I started realizing that I got people in my congregation who are fluent and bilingual and every single day negotiate back and forth. They are way more capable for this world than I am. So what can I do to be a learner? What can I do to do more listening? The more and more that I lead through talking, the more I realize I need to do more listening. I need to develop deep empathy. I need to become the kind of listener that when people finish a conversation with me, they feel felt. They feel like I understood them and got them. Here's a little trick. Try to get to the place where whenever you say back to someone something they heard, they don't say, oh my gosh, you're right. Instead, they say, yes, that's right. You get me. I don't do it perfectly at all. I'm really a good talker. One of my Presbyterian buddies said, this is a problem with being Presbyterian. We are so good at talking, after a while, we think we've actually done something, right? But what are the practices that enable us to develop empathy, attunement? What are the practices of looking? Of what Heifetz calls getting up on the balcony, seeing the larger system, being able to observe something deeply, to not run to solving a problem until you've actually seen it from multiple perspectives. I've come to figure out that I haven't seen a situation until I've heard many more diverse voices give me their eyes. That left to myself, what I will do is I will solve the problem with my own tools, and most of the time, those are wrong. And I need a practice of lamenting. I need to be able to lead right in the middle of the brutal facts, the reality, to own the facts, to own the pain, to enter into it and say, with God, but I trust you in the middle of it. Heating, holding, hammering, and quenching. A grounded identity and a resilient character that is shaped through reflections, relationships, and a rule of life in a rhythm of leading and not leading. This is the section that helps us experience and develop the tempering we need. I was doing this presentation a few years ago to another denomination outside of Cleveland at one of the retreat centers, and an older man walked up to me and he said, look, I love hearing you talk about blacksmithing and stuff. I love hearing you talk about this. Before I was a pastor, I was a miner in the mines of West Virginia. And you know, it was interesting because at the end of the day, the whistle would go and you wanted to go home and you just wanted to like drop your tool and get on out of there. But there was a rule: you weren't allowed to go until you took your pick back to the forge and you heated it up and you let it cool down, and you heated it up and you let it cool down, and you'd file it and you'd make sure it was in good shape, but you heated it up and let it cool down until a blue line came back to the steel down the middle of it. You see, when a piece of steel is tempered, it actually creates a blue hue. It's why Carl Sandburg has some poems called Laughing Blue Steel. And what it's about is this, is that when you form a tool, you pound on it and it gets shaped and it gets stronger. But when you use a tool and you pound on it, you keep putting stress into the tool. And if you keep pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding, it will break. It does. There's a moment when it goes from being strong to being brittle. And that's what many of us are. We are working away, hammering away. We have this granite mountain of despair in front of us, and we are pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding until we break. A tempered tool is not strong. It's strong and flexible. It's halfway between soft and brittle. And the key to that flexibility, the key to that tempered, is having a rhythm of pulling the stress out of the system. It's a long, slow release. You don't take this tool and plunge it into the water. You let it cool slowly in a repetitive way in a process that's called quenching. Bill Bowerman, the famous track coach of Oregon, he's the guy who invented the waffle shoes. He worked for Nike. He's the guy who brought jogging to America. He saw a bunch of people in New Zealand back in the 1950s running around. Back then in the United States, the only time anybody ran is if they were being chased. And they had no clothes for it. So he started a jogging group so that people would just get out there in their dress pants and go jogging. And then that's where the whole idea of the whole industry that we have today comes from. What he also was the coach who talked about what we now call periodization, about how if you're going to train for something over a long period of time, you need to have a rhythm of stress and rest. And so he put it this way. He was talking to his team. We coached the men's team. He said, gentlemen, take a primitive organism, any weak, pitiful organism, make it lift or jump or run, let it rest. What happens? A little miracle. It gets a little better. That's all training is. Stress, recovery, improve. Dear friends, I'm not just talking about Sabbath, though we could probably. I'm talking about having a rhythm in your life of places where you are leading and not leading. I'm talking about having places in your life where you know this is not a place where I need to bring change. This is a place where I get to receive. One of the hardest parts after being a pastor for 27 years, I looked forward to the fact that my wife and I were going to get to actually now worship together and go to worship together. And I wasn't going to be leading worship. I'm going to be at the seminary. My Sundays were clean and clear. And we started going to worship together. Now you need to know that when I was a pastor, my wife we had a 9:30 service and my wife used to come to our 11 o'clock service. And the only problem is that service started at 10:45, but she came to the 11 o'clock service. And so for many years, we had this conversation about how she came in late all the time. And then she would look at me as the therapist she is and said, do you need me to listen to you more? Is that the problem? And don't argue with a therapist. And so, but now we're going to go to church together. And I started realizing that we started going to church together and she was always showing up late. And I was so used to not only being on time, but being early. And we started having this growing argument about like why I needed to be there on time. And I just thought this was ridiculous. Of course we should be there on time. You know what it does to the worship team and the people to open worship without anybody there? And she's like, Todd, it's going to be fine. They don't need us there. You're not that important. They don't need you there. Oh, we argued. And I remember one day we're going to the church and she's driving and we know we're about 5 minutes late. And she says, look, just get out, go get a seat. I'll be there in a minute. And I get out and I slam the door and I'm walking into worship, praise the Lord, he's risen today. And I'm sitting in my pew and I step over somebody and I'm so sorry, we're late. And then somebody else steps in and I look at them and say, my wife's going to come in a minute. I'm sorry, she's going to interrupt you. And they come in and she steps over and I'm looking at them like, sorry, she's always late. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's on. We're going to have that fight. We're doing this. And right in the middle of it, I felt like God said to me, you get to worship with your wife. These people don't need you to start on time. For the first time in 27 years, they don't need you to start on time. You are more concerned about getting here on time than you are the fact that you get to worship with your wife. So let it go. You're not leading. So now my spiritual practice is showing up late for church every week. As a reminder that I'm not in charge. We need rhythms in our life that enable us to let go the stress, to be reminded that we are no longer in charge, that we are no longer the people. It's the reason why I have a little place in Idaho that I use for retreat. It's the reason why I have a rhythm of my life, and that we all need to have a rhythm of leading and not leading. So as we close this morning, I'd like you to think before you go, just before you get on a plane and go back into the stress of leading, of what you need to be able to maintain core purpose and integrity, to go back to the granite mountain of despair. What do you need to add to the anvil of relationships for your life and leadership? Do you have partners? It's not good to lead alone. Do you have friends? And do you know the difference? Do you have mentors who will be committed to you for the sake of your leading? And what ways do your spiritual practices need to be adapted? In all the literature, there's one kind of common thing about people who are resilient change leaders. They have what's called a grounded identity. It's like the core material. It's an identity that is grounded in something other than your need to be successful at leading change. For people to be really resilient, you need to be grounded in something other than your success in leading change. The more you need to be successful in leading change, the more fragile you'll be. You need to be grounded in something other, like Jesus was. At this time. At what time? At this time. Before he preached a sermon, cast out a demon, confronted a power, done a miracle. But at this time, before any of it had happened, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. The moment he came out of the water, he saw the sky split open and God's Spirit looking like a dove come down on him. And along with the Spirit, a voice. You are my child. You're chosen and marked by my love. You are the pride of my life. Dear friends, before you go back into leading change, facing resistance, forming resilience, know this, that at this time, before you've done actually anything at all, you already, from the beginning of time, were already chosen, marked by God's love, pride of God's life. You are already loved, chosen. God delights in you. Let yourself be grounded in that and shaped for the challenge in front of you. So that the day will come that in every one of the places we serve, God's kingdom will come and God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And God bless you as you do. Thank you very much.